Commander Calvaro stood in chains before the Galactic Tribunal, and he felt the weight of 1,000 eyes upon him. The great hall stretched upward into darkness, and lights from distant stars flickered through the glass ceiling above. 12 alien species sat in judgment, and not a single one of them showed any mercy in their strange and terrible faces. Kale was a human, and humans were considered weak by most species in the galaxy. They lived short lives, and they had no natural weapons like claws or venom or armored skin. The other races tolerated humanity because humans were useful as workers and soldiers, and nothing more. But Kale had done something that no human was supposed to do. He had said no to the powerful ones, and he had refused to follow their cruel orders. The High Arbiter was a tall creature with pale blue skin and 4 arms. He raised one of his hands, and the hall fell silent in an instant. Commander Calvaro of the human fleet. The Arbiter spoke in a voice that echoed like thunder. You stand accused of disobedience against the Galactic Council, and you have endangered the peace treaty with the Varathian hegemony. Kale lifted his head and looked directly at the Arbiter without any fear in his eyes. His uniform was torn, and his face was bruised from the guards who had beaten him, but his spirit remained unbroken. I saved 40,000 lives, Kale said in a calm and steady voice. The Council ordered me to abandon the colony on Era 7 and leave those people to die, so that the Varathians would be pleased. A murmur ran through the hall, and several of the alien judges shifted in their seats. The Varathians demanded the territory, the Arbiter replied coldly. The colony was built on land they claimed as sacred, and you were ordered to withdraw all humans from that world. There was no time, Kale answered. The Varathians gave us 12 hours to evacuate 40,000 men and women and children, and we had only 3 transport ships. I requested more time and more ships, but the Council refused. He turned and looked at the 12 judges one by one, and his voice grew stronger with every word. You told me to leave them behind, and I refused. You told me that human lives were an acceptable sacrifice for peace, and I said no. I held the defensive line for 3 days, until every single colonist was safely aboard the evacuation fleet. The Arbiter slammed his hand against the podium, and the sound rang out like a gunshot. You fired upon Varathian warships, and you killed 300 of their soldiers. You have brought shame upon the Council, and you have threatened the stability of the entire galaxy. Kale felt anger rise in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. He knew that they had already decided his fate long before this trial began. I fired upon ships that were attacking unarmed civilians, he said quietly. I did what any commander with honor would do. The Varathian ambassador rose from his seat in the gallery above. He was a massive creature covered in dark scales with eyes that glowed like hot coals. His voice was a deep growl that made the air itself seem to vibrate. This human has insulted the hegemony, and he must pay the ultimate price. We demand his execution. The crowd erupted in noise, and some voices called for mercy, while others called for blood. Kale stood still in the center of the chaos, and he waited for the judgment he knew was coming. The Arbiter raised all 4 of his arms, and slowly the hall grew quiet again. The Council has deliberated, and we have reached a verdict, he announced. Execution would make this human a martyr to his people, and we cannot allow that. Instead, we have chosen a punishment that will serve as a warning to all who would defy the will of the Council. Kale felt a cold chill run down his spine as the Arbiter turned to face him directly. Commander Calvaro, you are hereby sentenced to exile on Terminus 9. The hall exploded in gasps and whispers. Even the Varathian ambassador seemed surprised by this announcement. Terminus 9 was a name that every being in the galaxy knew and feared. It was a quarantined death world where the most dangerous creatures in the universe lived and hunted. The atmosphere was poison, and the plants were deadly, and the predators were nightmares made flesh. No species had ever survived on that world for more than 3 days. Exile to Terminus 9 was not a sentence. It was a death sentence dressed up in fancy words. Cale looked at the faces of the judges, and he saw satisfaction in their expressions. They wanted him to beg, and they wanted him to cry, and they wanted him to show the weakness they believed all humans possessed. He would not give them that pleasure. "Very well," Cale said in a voice that carried across the silent hall. "Send me to your death world and watch what happens next." The guards grabbed him roughly and began to drag him toward the doors. Cale did not struggle, and he did not look back. As he passed through the crowd, he heard voices calling out to him. Some were humans, and they were weeping and reaching toward him with desperate hands. He wanted to comfort them, but the guards pushed him forward without mercy. "Remember this day," Cale shouted back to the crowd. "Remember what they do to those who protect the innocent." The doors slammed shut behind him, and he was thrown into a dark prison cell. There he sat for 3 days, while they prepared the transport ship that would carry him to his doom. On the 3rd night, a young human guard came to his cell. The guard was barely more than a boy, and his hands trembled as he unlocked the door. "Commander Varro," the young man whispered, "I served under you at the Battle of Nexus Station, and you saved my life that day." Cale stood and placed his hand on the young guard's shoulder. "What is your name, soldier?" "Marcus, sir." "Private Marcus Chun. Listen to me, Marcus. I need you to deliver a message to Admiral Harrison on Earth, and you must tell her everything that happened here. Can you do that?" Marcus nodded quickly, and his eyes were full of tears. "I will, sir. But what should I tell her about you?" Cale smiled, and it was the smile of a man who had already accepted his fate. "Tell her that they sent me to die, but I do not plan to cooperate with their wishes. Tell her that humanity has not seen the last of Cale Varro." The next morning they came for him. They put him in chains and they marched into the transport ship. The vessel was old and dirty, and it smelled of fear and death. The pilot was an alien with insect-like features, and he looked at Cale with something like pity in his compound eyes. "The journey will take 6 hours," the pilot said. "You should rest because you will need all your strength." Cale sat in the corner of the transport, and he watched the stars through the small window. Somewhere out there was Earth, and somewhere out there were the 40,000 people he had saved. That thought gave him comfort as the ship descended through the blood-red clouds of Terminus 9. The landing was rough, and the guards did not bother to unlock his chains. They simply opened the cargo door and kicked him out into the alien jungle below. Cale fell hard, and he felt bones break and pain explode through his body. He lay on the ground for a long moment, and he listened to the ship rise back into the sky. When he finally opened his eyes, he saw a world of nightmares. The plants were black and twisted, and the sky was the color of rust. Strange sounds echoed through the forest, and somewhere in the distance something roared. Cale pulled himself to his feet, and he took his first breath of the toxic air. It burned his lungs like fire, but he forced himself to stand tall. "All right," he said to the empty jungle around him. "Let us see what you have." And so began his time in hell. The first day on Terminus 9 was pure agony, and Cale spent most of it crawling through the black jungle with broken ribs and a fractured arm. Every breath was a battle because the air was thick with poison, and his lungs screamed for oxygen that was not there. He found shelter under a massive fallen tree, and he stayed there until the worst of the pain faded. His military training had prepared him for harsh conditions, but nothing could have prepared him for this nightmare world. On the second day, he learned to move more carefully. The plants on Terminus 9 were not like the plants on any other world. Some of them had thorns that could cut through steel, and others released clouds of toxic spores when touched. He watched a creature the size of a dog walk into a patch of innocent-looking flowers, and within seconds, the creature was dead. Water was another problem. The rivers and streams were filled with acid, and drinking from them would kill him faster than the predators. Cale searched for hours until he found a type of plant that stored clean water inside its thick stem. He cut it open with a sharp rock and drank deeply. By the third day, his body had started to adapt to the poison air. His lungs still burned, but the burning was less intense than before. Human beings were resilient creatures, and their bodies could adjust to almost any environment if given enough time. But time was a luxury that Terminus 9 did not give freely. On that third day, Kale had his first encounter with a real predator. The creature came out of nowhere, and it was fast and silent and deadly. It looked like a wolf, but it was covered in armored plates, and its mouth was filled with teeth like daggers. Kale ran. He ran faster than he had ever run in his life, and he dodged between trees and jumped over rocks. The creature was faster, and it was gaining on him with every second. Just when he thought his life was over, he spotted a narrow crack in a cliff face. He threw himself into the crack and squeezed through the tight space. The predator crashed against the rocks behind him, and it howled with rage, but it could not follow. Kale lay in the darkness of the cave, and he gasped for air. His heart was pounding so hard, he could hear it in his ears. But he was alive, and that was all that mattered. On the fourth day, everything changed. Kale was walking through a rocky valley when he heard a sound that made his blood run cold. It was a deep rumbling growl that seemed to come from the earth itself. The ground shook beneath his feet, and birds scattered from the trees. He climbed to the top of a ridge and looked down into the valley below. What he saw there took his breath away. It was the largest creature he had ever seen in his life. The beast was at least 12 meters long, and it had 6 powerful limbs and thick armored skin that glowed with strange blue markings. Its head was massive, and its jaws could easily swallow a transport shuttle. But the creature was not hunting. It was trapped. A rock slide had collapsed onto the beast, and huge boulders pinned its body to the ground. The creature was struggling to free itself, but the rocks were too heavy, and each movement seemed to cause it tremendous pain. Kale watched from the ridge, and his first thought was to run. This creature was clearly the apex predator of Terminus 9, and it could kill him with a single bite. The smart thing to do was to walk away and let nature take its course. But something held him there. He looked into the creature's eyes, and he saw something unexpected. He saw intelligence, and he saw fear, and he saw a desperate will to survive. That look reminded him of the colonists on Eris 7. They had been trapped and afraid, and everyone had told him to walk away. But he had refused then, and he would refuse now. "I must be insane," Kale muttered to himself. He climbed down from the ridge and approached the trapped beast slowly. The creature turned its massive head toward him, and a deep growl rumbled in its throat. Warning signals flashed across its glowing markings, and its eyes locked onto him with deadly focus. "Easy there," Kale said in a soft voice. "I am not here to hurt you." The creature watched him with suspicion as he examined the rocks. The boulders were enormous, and he could not possibly move them on his own. But he noticed that some of the smaller rocks were wedged in ways that supported the larger ones. If he could remove the right pieces, then the whole structure might shift. He started to dig. He used his bare hands and sharp stones and anything else he could find. The work was exhausting, and the creature never stopped watching him. Several times the beast growled and snapped its jaws, and Kale thought it would try to kill him. But each time he spoke to it in a calm voice, and each time the creature settled down. Hours passed, and the sun moved across the red sky. Kale's hands were bleeding and his muscles were screaming, but he refused to stop. He had come too far to give up now. Finally, after 9 hours of brutal labor, he pulled out the last supporting rock. The boulder shifted and then rolled away, and suddenly the creature was free. The beast pulled itself out of the rubble with a mighty roar. It shook the dust from its armored body and turned to face the tiny human who had saved its life. Kale's heart was pounding. He had no weapon and no way to escape if the creature decided to attack. He could only stand there and wait for whatever came next. The beast took one step toward him, and then another. Its massive head lowered until its face was just inches from Kale's. Its breath was hot, and it smelled like blood and death. For a long moment they stared at each other. Then something incredible happened. The creature made a soft sound deep in its throat, and it pressed its snout gently against Kale's chest. The glowing markings on its body shifted from warning red to a peaceful blue. Kale reached out with a trembling hand and touched the creature's armored head. The skin was warm and rough, and he could feel the tremendous power contained within. "You understand, do you not?" Kale whispered. "You know that I chose to help you when I could have walked away." The creature made another soft sound, and its eyes closed for a moment. In that moment, a bond was formed between them. It was not something that could be explained with words. It was deeper than language and deeper than species. It was the connection between two survivors who had looked death in the face and refused to accept it. Kale smiled, and he felt tears running down his dirty face. "I think I will call you Morrow," he said, "because you are my hope for tomorrow." Morrow raised her head and let out a thunderous roar that echoed across the valley. Birds scattered and lesser predators fled in terror. The apex predator of Terminus 9 had found something she had never had before. She had found a companion. From that day forward, they were never apart. Kale rode on Morrow's back as she ran through the jungle, and she kept him safe from all the dangers of the death world. In return, he used his human mind to help her hunt more effectively and avoid traps and find the best food. They were two creatures from different worlds, and they had nothing in common except one thing. They both refused to die. The galaxy had sent Kale to Terminus 9 because they wanted him to vanish and be forgotten. But they had made a terrible mistake. They had given him exactly what he needed to become something more than he was before. Months passed on Terminus 9, and Kale began to change. The poison air no longer burned his lungs, and his body grew stronger and harder than it had ever been before. His skin became rough from the harsh sun, and his muscles grew thick from constant struggle. He was no longer the clean and proper commander who had stood before the Galactic Council. He was becoming something new. He was becoming a survivor. Morrow stayed by his side through every challenge. The great beast seemed to understand that her small human companion was special. She protected him from the other predators, and she kept him warm during the freezing nights. In return, Kale gave her something that no creature on Terminus 9 had ever given her before. He gave her strategy. Before meeting Kale, Morrow had hunted with pure instinct and raw power. She was the strongest creature on the planet, and she had never needed to think about her hunts. But Kale showed her a different way. He taught her to study her prey and learn their patterns. He showed her how to set traps and drive prey toward ambush points. He helped her understand that brains could be just as powerful as claws. Together, they became the most dangerous hunting team on Terminus 9. Nothing could stand against them, and nothing could escape them. During the first year, Kale built a shelter near a cliff face that overlooked the entire valley. He used the bones of dead predators for the frame, and he covered it with thick leaves that kept out the acid rain. It was not pretty, but it was home. He also learned which plants were safe to eat and which ones would kill him. Some of the fruits on Terminus 9 were actually delicious once he figured out how to remove the poisonous skin. He even discovered a type of root that could be ground into flour and baked into simple bread. Every night Kale would sit at the entrance of his shelter and look up at the stars. Somewhere out there was Earth, and somewhere out there were the people he had saved. He wondered if they remembered him. He wondered if anyone still spoke his name. But mostly he thought about the council and the judgment they had passed. They thought they had destroyed him, but they were wrong. Every day that he survived was a victory against them. During the second year, something unexpected happened. A damaged scout ship crashed in the jungle about 10 kilometers from his shelter. Kale heard the explosion, and he saw the smoke rising above the trees. He climbed onto Morrow's back, and they raced through the jungle toward the crash site. When they arrived, they found the ship broken and burning, and 3 alien merchants trapped inside. The merchants were terrified when they saw Morrow approach. They screamed and tried to run, but their legs were injured and they could not escape. They were certain that the great beast would devour them. But then they saw Kale, a human man sitting calmly on the monster's back with no fear in his eyes. "Do not be afraid," Kale called out. "We are here to help you." The merchants stared at him with disbelief. How could a human be alive on Terminus 9? How could anyone have tamed a creature like this? Kale climbed down from Morrow and approached the crashed ship. He pulled the injured merchants from the wreckage and carried them one by one to safety. Then, he treated their wounds with medicine he had made from local plants. For 3 weeks, the merchants stayed at his shelter and recovered from their injuries. At first they were afraid of Morrow, but slowly they came to understand that the great beast meant them no harm. One of the merchants was a Talvian named Rexer, and he had 100 questions for Kale. "How did you come to this world?" Rexer asked one evening as they sat around a fire. Kale told him the whole story. He told him about the colony on Eris 7 and the 40,000 lives he had saved. He told him about the trial and the sentence and the exile. He told him about his first terrible days on Terminus 9 and how he had found Morrow trapped under the rocks. Rexer listened with wide eyes, and when Kale finished, the alien shook his head in amazement. "The galaxy believes you are dead," Rexer said. "They think Terminus 9 killed you within the first week." "Good," Kale replied with a dark smile. "Let them think that for a little while longer." When the merchants were finally healed, they began to repair their ship. It took many days, but eventually they got the engines working again. The ship was damaged, but it could still fly well enough to reach the nearest space station. Before they left, Kale gave them supplies for the journey. He loaded their cargo hold with food and water and medicine. The merchants were overwhelmed by his generosity. "How can we repay you?" Rexer asked. "You saved our lives, and you asked nothing in return." Kale looked at the alien, and his eyes were cold and hard. "There is one thing you can do for me," he said. "When you reach the space station, I want you to send a message across the galaxy. Tell everyone that the dead man of Terminus 9 is alive. Tell them that I have tamed the untamable, and I am coming home." Rexer nodded slowly, and he understood the weight of what Kale was asking. "You want them to know that they failed," he said. "Yes," Kale replied. "I want the Council to know that they did not break me. I want the Varathians to know that their enemy still lives. And I want humanity to know that one of their own survived the impossible." The merchants boarded their repaired ship and lifted off into the red sky. Kale watched them go, and he felt something stir in his heart. For 3 years, he had been content to survive, but now he wanted more. He wanted justice. That night, Kale made a decision. He would find a way off this death world, and he would return to the civilized galaxy. He would stand before the Council once more, and he would demand answers for what they had done. But he would not go alone. Morrow would come with him. Let the galaxy see what he had become. Let them see the human who had conquered their ultimate punishment. Let them see the monster who walked at his side. They had sent him to die, but instead they had created something far more dangerous. They had created a man with nothing left to lose. Kale placed his hand on Morrow's massive head and looked up at the stars. "Soon," he whispered. "Soon we will show them." Morrow rumbled softly, and her glowing markings shifted to a fierce red. She understood. She was ready. And somewhere across the galaxy, the message was already spreading. The dead man was alive, and he was coming home. The message spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. Every news network and every social feed and every whisper in every dark corner carried the same incredible story. The dead man of Terminus 9 was alive. Some people refused to believe it. Terminus 9 was supposed to be impossible to survive, and everyone knew that. The Council itself had declared Commander Kale Varro dead 3 years ago. How could a single human have lasted on a world that killed everything? But then the merchants released their recordings, and doubt turned to shock. The video showed a man who barely looked human anymore. His skin was weathered, and his eyes were wild, and his body was covered in scars from countless battles. And behind him stood the most terrifying creature anyone had ever seen. Morrow became famous overnight. Scientists argued about what species she might be, and military experts calculated how much firepower it would take to stop her. Some called her a demon and others called her a god, but everyone agreed on one thing. She was bonded to a human, and that changed everything. The Galactic Council went into emergency session. The 12 species argued for days about what to do. Some wanted to send a fleet to Terminus 9 and kill Kale before he could leave. Others argued that killing him now would only make things worse. In the end, they decided to wait and watch. Perhaps the human would die on his own. Perhaps he would never find a way off the death world. They were wrong. 6 months after the merchants left Terminus 9, another ship crashed on the planet. This one was a military vessel, and the crew did not survive the landing. But the ship itself was mostly intact, and Kale saw his opportunity. He spent 3 months repairing the vessel with whatever parts he could find. Morrow helped him by carrying heavy equipment and by protecting him from predators while he worked. It was difficult and frustrating, and there were many times when Kale wanted to give up. But he never did. Giving up was not something humans did. Finally, the ship was ready. It was ugly and patched together, and it made strange noises when the engines ran. But it flew, and that was enough. Kale loaded the cargo hold with everything Morrow would need for the journey. He built a special harness so she could be secured during flight. He calculated the route to Citadel Station, and he plotted every jump carefully. On the day of departure, Kale stood at the edge of the clearing and looked back at the nightmare world that had been his home for almost 4 years. Terminus 9 had tried to kill him in 1,000 different ways, but he had survived them all. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You made me strong." Then he climbed aboard his ship, and he left the world behind forever. The journey took 2 weeks, and the ship nearly broke down 3 times. But Kale kept it flying with determination and skill, and a little bit of luck. When Citadel Station finally appeared in his view screen, he felt his heart begin to pound. This was it. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Citadel Station was the largest structure in the known galaxy. It was a massive ring that orbited a dead star, and it housed representatives from every species. The Galactic Council met here, and treaties were signed here, and the fate of billions was decided here. When Kale's battered ship entered the station's sensor range, every alarm in the facility began to sound. Security forces scrambled and defense weapons powered up. The entire station went into lockdown. But Kale did not attack. He simply opened a communication channel and spoke calmly. "This is Commander Kale Varro of the human fleet requesting permission to dock. I am here for a public tribunal, and I am unarmed." The communication officer on the other end could not believe what she was hearing. She stared at her screen for a long moment before responding. "Commander Varro, you are not authorized to be here. Turn your ship around immediately, or you will be destroyed." Kale smiled and leaned back in his chair. "I do not think you want to do that," he said. "Every news network in the galaxy is watching right now. Do you really want to shoot down an unarmed man who's asking for justice?" There was a long pause, and then a different voice came over the channel. It was the voice of the High Arbiter himself. "Commander Varro, you have returned from a death sentence. This is unprecedented. What do you want?" "I want what I should have had 4 years ago," Kale replied. "I want a fair trial. I want to tell my side of the story." And I want the galaxy to see the truth about what the council did to me. Another long pause. Kale could imagine the council members arguing among themselves. They were trapped, and they knew it. If they killed him now, they would look like tyrants. If they let him speak, they would be exposed. Finally, the arbiter spoke again. Very well. You will be granted a public tribunal, but you must surrender yourself to station security, and your vessel will be impounded. Kale laughed, and it was not a pleasant sound. I will surrender myself, but my companion comes with me. And believe me when I say that nobody wants to try and separate us. What companion? You will see. When Kale's ship docked at the station's main hangar, there were 500 armed guards waiting for him. They had their weapons raised, and they were ready to shoot at the first sign of trouble. The cargo door opened slowly, and Kale stepped out into the light. He looked nothing like the clean and proper officer who had been exiled 4 years ago. He wore armor made from the bones of Terminus 9 predators, and his face was hard as stone. Then Morrow emerged from the ship behind him. The guards took one look at the massive creature, and half of them ran. The other half opened fire, but their weapons did nothing against Morrow's armored hide. She ignored the attacks completely and simply walked forward at Kale's side. Stop firing, the security commander shouted. Stop firing right now. The guards lowered their weapons and stared in terror. Morrow was even more frightening in person than she had been in the videos. She was a living nightmare, and she was completely loyal to the human walking beside her. Kale looked at the security commander and spoke in a voice that carried across the entire hangar. I told you. My companion comes with me. Now take me to the council. The commander nodded slowly and stepped aside. There was nothing else he could do. And so the dead man of Terminus 9 walked through the halls of Citadel Station with a monster at his side. Every camera in the galaxy was focused on him, and every person watched in amazement. Humanity had been sent a message that they were weak and expendable. But Kale Varro had returned from the impossible, and he was about to send a message of his own. The Great Tribunal Hall was packed with representatives from every species in the galaxy. They had come to see the impossible man who had returned from the dead. They had come to see the monster that walked at his side. They had come to witness history. Kale stood in the center of the hall exactly where he had stood 4 years ago. But everything else was different. He was no longer in chains, and he was no longer afraid. Morrow lay curled behind him like a living fortress, and her glowing eyes watched the crowd with deadly focus. The 12 judges of the Galactic Council looked down at him from their high seats. The High Arbiter was still there with his pale blue skin and his 4 arms. But now there was fear in his eyes instead of arrogance. Commander Kale Varro, the Arbiter began. You have returned from your exile against the will of this council. You have brought a dangerous creature into this sacred hall. What do you have to say for yourself? Kale looked up at the judges, and his voice rang out clear and strong. 4 years ago, you sentenced me to death because I refused to sacrifice innocent people. You sent me to a world where nothing was supposed to survive. You wanted me to disappear and be forgotten. But here I am. He turned to face the crowd and raised his arms. Look at me. I am proof that your death world could not break the human spirit. I am proof that your punishment only made me stronger. And I am proof that the Galactic Council was wrong. The hall erupted in noise. Some people cheered and others shouted in anger. The guards moved closer, but none of them dared to approach while Morrow was watching. You speak of innocence, the Arbiter said when the noise died down. But you killed Varathian soldiers. You violated the peace treaty. I defended unarmed civilians against an unprovoked attack, Kale replied. The Varathians were the aggressors, and everyone in this hall knows it. You sacrificed human lives to please an empire of bullies, and that is the truth you tried to bury. The Vorathian ambassador rose from his seat in the gallery. He was the same massive-scaled creature who had demanded Kale's execution 4 years ago. "This human insults us again," the ambassador roared. "The hegemony will not tolerate such disrespect. You have made a grave mistake by allowing him to speak." "And what will you do about it?" Kale shouted back. "Send me to another death world? I already conquered the first one." The ambassador's eyes burned with rage, and he pointed at Kale with one massive claw. "The hegemony is done with words. You will learn what it means to defy us." He pressed a button on his wrist communicator, and suddenly alarms began to sound throughout the station. The lights flickered and the floor shook, and a voice came over the speakers. "Warning! Vorathian fleet detected. Multiple warships approaching Citadel Station. This is not a drill." The hall exploded into chaos. Delegates ran for the exits, and guards tried to maintain order. The Vorathians had been waiting for this moment, and now they were going to destroy the station and everyone on it. The High Arbiter grabbed his console with all 4 hands. "This is madness. You cannot attack Citadel Station. It violates every treaty in existence." The Vorathian ambassador laughed, and his voice was like grinding rocks. "Treaties are for the weak. The hegemony takes what it wants, and we want this station destroyed. Let this be a lesson to all who would defy us." Kale looked at Morrow, and she looked back at him. They did not need words to communicate. They had been partners for too long. "Everyone listen to me," Kale shouted over the noise. "I have spent 4 years fighting for survival against impossible odds. I know how to beat an enemy that thinks it cannot be beaten. But I need your help." The crowd fell silent, and all eyes turned to him. "The Vorathians believe they are stronger than us, but strength is not everything. On Terminus 9, I learned that the smartest fighter always wins. We can defeat them, but only if we work together." A human admiral pushed through the crowd. It was Admiral Harrison, the woman Kale had sent a message to 4 years ago. "I believe in you, Commander," she said. "What do you need?" Kale smiled for the first time since entering the hall. "Get me to a command center. Morrow and I will handle the rest." What followed was the most incredible battle the galaxy had ever witnessed. Kale took command of the station's defenses, and he used tactics that no alien commander would have ever considered. He was unpredictable and creative and absolutely ruthless. Morrow boarded the lead Vorathian warship through a maintenance hatch, and she tore through their soldiers like they were made of paper. The sight of the great beast rampaging through their ship caused panic among the Vorathian crews. Meanwhile, the humans of Citadel Station rose up with a ferocity that shocked everyone. They had watched one of their own survive the impossible, and now they were inspired to do the same. They fought harder than they had ever fought before. When the last Vorathian warship retreated into the darkness of space, the hall erupted in cheers. The impossible had happened. A single human and his monster companion had led a ragtag defense against one of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy. And they had won! The High Arbiter stepped down from his seat and approached Kale. His face was pale, and his hands were trembling. "Commander Varro, I was wrong about you." "The Council was wrong. Can you ever forgive us?" Kale looked at the Arbiter for a long moment. Part of him wanted to hate this creature and everyone like him. Part of him wanted revenge for all the suffering he had endured. But a greater part of him remembered why he had started this journey. He had not fought to save himself. He had fought to prove that human lives mattered. "I did not come here for an apology," Kale said quietly. "I came here to show the galaxy what humanity is capable of. We are not weak and we are not expendable. We are survivors." He turned to face the crowd one final time. "Let today be a new beginning. Let us build a galaxy where no one is sacrificed for politics. Let us create a future where every life has value." Morrow raised her head, and let out a roar that shook the entire station. It was a sound of triumph and defiance and hope. And across the galaxy, billions of humans heard about what had happened. They heard about the man who had been exiled to die and returned with a monster. They heard about the impossible victory against the Vorathian fleet. And they knew that they would never be looked down upon again. Kale stood in the observation deck and watched the stars. Morrow lay beside him with her massive head resting near his feet. They had come so far together, and now they had changed the course of history. "What do we do now?" Kale whispered. Morrow rumbled softly and pressed her snout against his hand. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That was all that mattered. Humanity had a champion again, and the galaxy would never forget his name.